I can do a crash course in redistricting. Yeah, okay.
Emily, you raised my curiosity. I honestly want to grab a promise from you that we're able to do one episode about the system because I'm fascinated about this.
Oh, I can talk about this for days.
But before we go in the discussion with Emily, let me explain you why districting is important.
So have you ever actually stopped to think about how political power physically moves across the United States? I mean, it's not just about flashy campaigns, right? It's this incredibly fascinating mechanical process that's driven by the map itself. Today, in this explainer, we're going to unpack the visual engine that drives US elections, the districting process that literally defines exactly who gets a voice and where that voice is coming from.
You might be wondering, why isn't state representation just permanent? Why don't the lines just stay exactly where they were drawn a century ago? Well, the boundaries dictating your voice in Congress and ultimately the control over federal laws and funding, they're fluid. They react to a very specific federally mandated rhythm that completely reshapes the map every single 10 years.
Okay, here is our roadmap for today. 1. The shifting electoral map. 2. The 4-step districting engine. 3. The rules of the game. And 4. Looking ahead to 2030. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the shifting electoral map and 6 decades of change. Take a look at this. It's a pretty incredible visual record. We've got 7 distinct maps here, mapping it all out from the 1960 census straight through to the 2020 census. Notice the patterns. As your eyes move from left to right, you can see certain regions consistently lighting up in green, while others are repeatedly flashing orange. It's honestly like this relentless tide of shifting geography.
So what are we actually looking at here? Well, green means a state gained US House seats. Orange means it lost seats. And gray just means no change. This map is quite literally a visual record of population movement dictating political power, because when people pack up their lives and move to a new state over a 10-year period, they bring their political representation right along with them.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 4-step districting engine, and how this cycle actually works. Before we get into the gears of the whole cycle, we really got to talk about apportionment. Think of it as the ultimate national balancing act. It's the mechanism of handing out US House seats among the states based purely on population. When a state's population swells, boom, more seats are allocated. But when populations shrink, or even if they just grow slower than the rest of the country, seats are taken away.
And the whole reality of this system hinges on one very specific number, 435. There are exactly 435 House seats to be distributed, no more, no less. That number does not change, making this a strict zero-sum game. If a green state is gaining one of those 435 seats because of population growth, an orange state somewhere else must, by pure mathematical definition, lose one. The pie doesn't get bigger, we're just moving the slices around.
So how does that slice moving actually play out? It runs on this relentless 4-step engine. Step 1, the census happens every 10 years, counting every single resident. Step 2, apportionment kicks in, allocating those 435 House seats based on that brand new population data. Step 3, the states themselves take over and redraw their congressional district boundaries. And finally, Step 4, voters head to the polls and elect representatives using those newly updated districts. It's an intricately linked chain of events.
Now notice the fascinating handoff and responsibilities here. The first half of the process, Step 1, the census, and Step 2, apportionment, happens strictly at the federal level. The US government handles the counting and the math. But then, the baton is passed. Step 3 and Step 4 are handed completely over to the state level. The states themselves are tasked with the actual redrawing of the geographic boundaries, and they run the elections. This massive shift in jurisdiction right in the middle of the cycle, that is exactly where the fierce political battles truly begin.
All right, Section 3, the rules of the game and key historical milestones.
So early on, some massive legal milestones really laid down the foundational rules for this entire cycle. In 1964, the Supreme Court case Wesbury v. Sanders established the absolutely crucial one-person, one-vote principle, requiring districts to have roughly equal populations. Then, just a year later, the landmark Voting Rights Act was passed to protect minority representation, which fundamentally changed how lines could legally be placed on a map to ensure fair voting power.
But you know, the rule book isn't just stuck in the past. It continues to be refined through more recent landmark cases. In 2013, Shelby County v. Holder fundamentally altered federal preclearance requirements for state maps. And then in 2019, Rucho v. Common Cause profoundly reshaped the landscape by ruling that federal courts cannot police partisan gerrymandering. The engine keeps running, but the legal environment it operates in is continually being interpreted by the highest courts.
Ultimately, all of these historical milestones act as these ever-evolving legal parameters. When states enter step 3 of our districting engine to redraw their maps, they aren't just drawing on a blank piece of paper. They are bound, and in some cases heavily restricted, by decades of Supreme Court precedent and federal legislation.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 4, looking ahead to 2030 and the next cycle.
Check out that blank space on the map labeled 2030 with the bold arrow pointing to the next cycle. It's a pretty stark visual reminder that this 4-step engine, it literally never stops. The population is shifting as we speak. The data for the next massive reapportionment is actively being generated right now, day by day, just waiting for the 2030 census to capture it and trigger the whole domino effect all over again.
And now, enjoy my discussion with Emily. I'm Paul, and this is Whereabouts Tales. Enjoy. Emily, good evening again. Hi.
Hi, so nice to talk with you.
So nice to talk to you again. Maybe a bit of a background story in one of the early episodes of Whereabouts Tales. We talk with Emily, who's in charge of Remake the Rules, and we talk about the process of remaking the rules, and also in a slight small part of the discussion, we discuss about the election in the US and the previous job that Emily had before. And I think that was the moment when, for me, there was a small bell that went, or not bell, but light bulb that went up. And I said, okay, I want to know more about districting, even though it's a dry topic, I would say. But considering the craziness of the world that is happening today, and considering the fact that we are close to the midterms happening this year, as far as I know, in November. If I say something wrong, please correct me. But happening this year in November, I think it's important, or it's nice for everyone to understand how the election process maybe it's running in the US. Before we start, Emily, why are districts important in the American election process?
Sure. And, I do acknowledge that lots of people do find conversations around redistricting a little dry, but I know that you and I both love talking about it.
Yes.
So I'm very excited for this conversation, and hopefully we can make it exciting for everyone else. Yeah.
Look, I would say this is the definition of two geeks talking about fun stuff.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
So please.
Yeah. In our previous conversation, it just kind of happened to come up as I was talking about the various places that I lived, including the state of Kansas in the United States. And I went to school there, but I also ended up working for the state legislative research department there, doing redistricting way back in 2012. And redistricting is the process of drawing boundaries for elected officials so that presumably, each person has the same power in their vote as everyone else. So, most simply, it's the idea that people are going to be moving around, they're going to be having families, what have you, the population is going to change over time. And as that population changes over time, the districts should change too, because it wouldn't be fair if, say, 5 people had their own representative and then 100,000 people had their own representative, right? So kind of baseline, the idea is to one person, one vote, to give equal power to all people.
And basically, based on the population of that district, on the population of that area, they get a certain amount of power in deciding the congressman, the senator, whomever the position is, or whomever the election, or the governor, whomever the election is for. How often is this process happening, Emily?
So usually this process happens once every 10 years. And what has really been hitting, I would say, international news is about the process for redrawing the districts for U.S. Congress people. So that's the House of Representatives at the federal level. Redistricting also happens for like state level positions too, but definitely the big ones that is in the news right now are going to be for that national level. And there is a process called reapportionment too, where there's only 435 House reps. So let's say California has a huge increase in population, which means that they might get extra reps and some states might lose. So there's kind of a competitiveness there too. And then once it's determined how many reps each state gets, then they start drawing the lines. And that process, up until recently, has always happened in accordance with the US Census, which happens every 10 years with the idea that every person within the country is counted. And then you have the most accurate number possible for who lives where and how many people live where.
Side question: those name of the cities when you're entering the city, where I remember it from the movies, when you have the population, is that still happening, or is that something which was happening in the past?
It's still happening. Definitely, some cities maybe don't care to update them as frequently as they could. Not a high priority, but actually, I live in the state of Colorado, and here in Colorado, they don't have population on the city signs. They have the elevation.
Oh, okay, yeah, makes sense. Makes priorities.
Yeah.
You have to set yourself priorities.
Exactly. Yeah.
Why was the discussion so hard or so big about California in preparation of these midterms?
Yeah. So, and I guess, I probably should have said this just a few minutes ago, but I don't consider myself an expert in redistricting or an election. I did happen to work very intimately with the process in one state years ago. But I continue to have a really significant interest and work professionally within the realm of using sophisticated information systems and software systems to make complicated decisions. So, like, talk about how we have injected incredibly robust and complicated information and software systems into making tremendously consequential decisions about where boundaries go for voting districts, right? But getting back to your question about California, part of the very big conversation around that is just how big the state of California is. So they have a lot of reps and they tend to skew more Democratic. So it is essentially seen as an opportunity to create a bunch more Democratic districts.
Understood. So basically, it's always about the leaning if it's blue or red, right? So that's why the focus is happening all the time. So take me a bit in the room. You are sitting at the table or at your desk, and you open the software that you are working with, and what are you physically looking at on the screen? What are you seeing? Are you seeing streets? Are you seeing population? Are you seeing people per house? I would like to understand because it's fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. So, I was revisiting it quite a bit in preparation for this conversation, but also really thinking about how it has changed since then. And it now looking back on it just feels kind of quaint and sweet, the work that I was doing back in 2012. And part of that is because where I worked was in a nonpartisan research department. So redistricting happens at the state level. And especially back when I was doing it, back in 2011, 2012, overwhelmingly, maybe even exclusively, all states, the legislature was in charge of their own redistricting. So elected officials within that state, almost every state also has something that mirrors Congress, right? They have state senators and they have state representatives. They come together and they draw all these lines, including their own districts. So it's a highly politicized process. And but every legislature does have a research department that's attached to them that is nonpartisan for any rep to use regardless of their party affiliation. And that's where I work. So what I was looking at was kind of the simplest but most useful data, right? So it was the census data, which in this case, the census is designed and intended to be anonymized, which means that even though you know lots of information about the people on the map and the data that they have collected about the people, it is aggregated to city blocks. If it's a rural area, it can even be a much larger area, right? So there's no single data point within any one of these polygons on a map. So yeah, we're looking at maps. We got roads, we got city boundaries, we got county boundaries. And then we have the census data that really is about telling us how many people live where, because at the end of the day, that's kind of the most important number in order to have a constitutionally sound map, because we have to have those equal numbers in district or close to equal. It would be very improbable to literally do equal districts, so there is a wiggle room there, but they're meant to be very close.
You said a few times independent, and you explain as well why you said independent. How I don't know how to ask it because I don't want to make it biases on left to the left or to the right, but how, and also it sounds really bad if I ask you how independent it was, but how much they try to push the direction in one area or the other?
Sure. Well, so for the work that was getting done for that nonpartisan research department, I would say overwhelmingly nonpartisan. That being said, it is designed to be support staff for the politicians, right? So there isn't like pushback against what they're doing to make them nonpartisan too, right? So they kind of still are creating the designs, making the final decision, adding the input. And at that point in time, I was kind of more, I think the idea, and I think a lot about this too, because the human adoption of our like tremendously complex and powerful tools is always way, way slower than the actual development of those tools. And so what I kind of ended up actually doing was like kind of having all this information and this capacity to draw any map and look at it and analyze it and compare it. And I was just kind of operating a mouse for other people, you know? We were just making our way through drawing these districts, whatever, on vibes will felt right, you know? And then after the fact, I could go ahead and do a deep dive and look into it. But yeah, that's kind of what it looked like.
Do you have a limit in which how to set up a district? Because you have I've seen it following the results of some elections, that you have sometimes multiple districts in the same city, or you have sometimes multiple cities in the same district, but the only criteria is just the population amount.
Well, so that has also been changing recently. The fundamental baseline is that near equal population. And what has been sort of agreed, but then there's other things that allow a little wiggle room there. So kind of the three main focuses that we had, again, way back in the sweet days of 2012, was near equal population, which in that case, near equal was plus or minus 5%. So there was a 5% range in either direction.
Which is good.
Which is good and reasonable and necessary.
Absolutely.
Yes. And part of that wiggle room also was to allow map designers to keep together what is generally referred to as communities of interest. So like that's going to be kind of, as you already said, oftentimes it's cities. You know, like cities are already kind of a strong political entity that have their own mayors and city councils and departments or what have you. And it can be really beneficial to them to be able to be within a congressional district if size allows. So being able to maybe keep a city together would be useful for that city. And then also, there is an idea behind, regardless, again, back in the sweet days, regardless of political affiliation, that you would keep incumbents inside of their own districts. And the idea there is that the people already elected them, that it's not really about the rep, it's about the fact that the people already chose to have them as a leader. So you don't want to just draw them outside of their own district, right?
Understood. So basically, you want to keep them there because they already made the decision, right? But okay, that means is it U.S. citizen population or is it only population?
It is all persons, period.
Okay, that is
And
interesting.
also, there has been a lot of arguments and desires to change that.
Exactly.
Yes. All persons, period.
Which makes sense from the logic perspective, because you talk about the people that are influenced by the elections, not necessarily only the people that are electing, which makes a lot of sense.
For sure.
But are the people without citizenship allowed to vote?
They are not allowed to vote.
Okay.
But they are still considered people who are represented.
Okay.
So another population group to kind of consider as a comparator here is children. Regardless of their citizenship, children cannot vote, but they are still deeply impacted and represented by their elected officials.
Correct.
Yeah.
That means you literally make no difference, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it. A lot of sense. Discussing about one single state, Emily. So if you say, okay, you have a state I'm talking about the presidential elections now, because somehow my curiosity goes to that direction. So you have the number of electors, right, that are in every state. They are also voted by the amount of votes that they get from the districts. Do you have an assignment of electors on districts?
So yes, for the electoral college, right? That is going to be mimicking how that reapportionment is for the House of Representatives and the redistricting.
Okay, that means that districting is critical for every piece of voting, including the presidential one.
Yeah, and that really is about, kind of, to get, I guess, a little pedantic, that reapportionment is how the states compare population-wise against each other, versus redistricting is really about inside of a single state. So, like, for example, this last census in 2020, based on population changes, where some states lost population and some states gained population. Before, the state of Colorado, where I live now, only had 7 reps. But because of population changes, we now have 8.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
That is extremely interesting. Okay, that's something I didn't know. So basically, that's changing not only inside the state, it's changing overall. That's, considering now everything that you explained me, I realized, yes, it's more, for sure it's not perfect, but it's really, 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 really good documented and thought about every movement that you have, every change that you have. It's like you give people the same amount of power, which is extremely interesting.
Yeah. And, I think that for how the process is supposed to work is tremendously admirable. And it also has a lot of potential to work really, really well. And also because it is so complex, even just like, it's like every topic that we mention opens 10 more doors, about like, There's a lot of potential for changes and for politicizing, and that's kind of what is happening now and what is making global news.
The you mentioned the software that you are using, that there was a software there that you are using for the process. Was there something new? Because you mentioned, as far as I remember in the last discussion that we had, that when the software appeared, there was the revolution inside this process because there was faster and more reliable. How was the process done before the software existed?
Well, so going back to when redistricting happens once every 10 years, right? 10 years in sort of the changes in technology that have occurred in the last 100 years are very, very significant. So the reason that I found myself working for the Kansas Legislative Research Department was because I had just graduated with a degree in geography, which is where geographic information systems and the study of them and the use of them usually sits here in the United States. So I was kind of hired as an operator of cartographic software, GIS software, and presumably the geostatistics that you can also do with that. And certainly 2010 for not just the ease of use and the power of looking at data that comprises hundreds of millions of people over an entire United States. I was looking at Kansas, but this is kind of the scale of the data that we were operating with. That was a far cry from what was accessible and useful in 2000, and definitely a big change from 1990, right? And we're talking about previously, we're just making guesses and hand-drawn maps and doing counts as best we can based on kind of city data and county data. And now, I wasn't involved in the process this last time, nor in the processes that are currently happening. But if you think about all of the now publicly accessible data, deeds, car loans, just housing addresses that can all be tied to demographic and personal information about ourselves, plus the potential for private marketing information and market information that can also be applied to us. We're like, that was not something that was certainly being used by my department, my nonpartisan department, back in 2020, 2012, but is absolutely accessible to folks that care to acquire it and pay for it right now.
It's that's first of all, the progress is incredible. The for me still the logic is incredible. The I think of course I'm not an expert. We are not an expert of any of legislative process, but I talk about my home country. I talk about Romania, and I know that we both vote based on the same logic since, I don't know, 35 years. Like nobody has even thought about changing it, how the regions are split and so on. And then you have something that really thought about the process. I'm curious, Emily, of course it's a far-fetched questions, but how many people from US know how this process is working?
I don't know. I mean, I did it for an entire year, and I certainly am not gonna tell people, right, that I'm an expert in it. So, and that
For sure.
I think just speaks to the level of complication. So it would not surprise me at all if it was largely opaque to most people.
The reason why I'm asking you is because you hear a lot from a lot of voices, the scream of elections were rigged, this was done there, and I mean, before you make this kind of statement and you offend everyone taking care of this process, because yeah, there's no question as that every system has its flaws, and most probably people will take advantage of the flaws. But a lot of people doing this process and investing a lot of time in creating all the districts and making sure everything is fair and everything is correct for everyone. And then you hear people screaming, "Process is rigged." Then you think about, "Oh, that's so offensive," and especially coming from the higher person in the States at the moment. It's unbelievable for me. It's such a complex process.
Mhm.
Did you ever have had the God feeling doing these splits, because you are moving people from left to right, right?
I certainly did not feel that way, because that was not, I was so far above my pay grade and how I was operating. But it did give me kind of, I mean, I feel like I got a real shock in my sort of professional innocence. Right? I was in my late 20s at that point in time. I was a child of the early internet, where this connectivity and this information sharing, there was nothing that it couldn't make better and that it couldn't solve. And then I think this was my first real situation where I was in the room and kind of watching people use these tools for what I considered not the greater good. Yeah. For
Okay.
maybe personal political gain, maybe not for making sure that all 9 million people in the state of Kansas had as good a vote and good a district as humanly possible. Mm-hmm.
And that's quite early. I read Careless People. I don't know if you know the book. Is written by the biggest whistleblower that Facebook had at this moment
yes.
until
Yeah.
now. And she said literally the same, that she thought that you could use those tools to support democracies but then she realized, no, it's not about that. It's about power, it's about making money, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was kind of the first phase of my education in that. But it really did maybe gird me and inspire me to realize that there is so much responsibility to take on here for kind of moral and ethical and good use of these technologies, and how easy it is to use them poorly or even just thoughtlessly. But even thoughtless use of extraordinarily powerful tools can be very harmful. Um, so kind of figuring out a way to drag people along to kind of reacclimate to this environment that we're in with these incredibly powerful tools, and kind of see what they're doing, but in a way that is pro-democratic, that is helpful, that is that kind of early internet dream.
So look, I think everyone has the political bias. If we want to admit it or not, I think we all have the political bias. We lean left, right, mid, center, doesn't matter. The only question is how strong is the political bias in comparison with your own values? Because at the end, that's the biggest question. I think depends a lot on the pressure coming from the top and so on. But I think it's a big question of power. And like you said, you are young, and I think with 20 something, it's surprising that you thought, okay, this is bad. Like, this is kind of, because you are young, don't get me wrong, but you don't have the life experience at 20 something, and you always think, okay, I do this, maybe this is how the things are done, and who am I to judge them if they are right or wrong? And you realize they are wrong, and I can imagine how wrong they were if you manage to realize so early that it's wrong. But talking about remaking the rules, Emily, what can be done better there?
I mean, for me, it is always a question of scale. I've worked inside of some of the largest and most consequential institutions that we have in the United States, like state legislatures. After that, I actually went into policing too and worked in a major metropolitan police department. And, talk about spaces where every day people are being asked to make choices that have the potential to be tremendously beneficial for others or potentially tremendously harmful for others. And seeing how important it is to design processes, in particular decision processes that let people make better choices. Um, and I think one of the things that I've seen with kind of the huge changes centered around integrating technology into decision flows, and just how hard it is, like we're talking crazy changes. Like for the very first thing is just kind of contextualizing and educating. The amount of changes to our informational environment and how we make decisions in that we collaborate with these tremendously expansive and powerful digital information tools is unprecedented, absolutely wild. And for me, no surprise that a lot of times we just don't know how to do it well yet. And I think acknowledging that is huge, right? It is the first step. It's incredibly important. So like I work a lot on that, just sort of the setting the scene, like really what are we dealing with here? And it is that because of all these changes, we are kind of estranged from how things are supposed to work and how we are supposed to make choices. And we have to kind of relearn how to do that.
Do you think it will help? It would help if the districts would be so that you would keep the level of information on the need to know basis? Because I think, like you said, it's important to choose the information that you give to a decision maker and to somehow give him a nudge in the not in the right direction, but in the direction only to know the numbers. But I guess that in the software today you can see which districts are changing, right?
So funny story about that. In 2012, when things were still contentious, but not quite as zany as they are now, the Kansas State Legislature was unable to decide on a map. So they ended their session. They went to special session. They couldn't do it. And it is required by law to do once every 10 years. So it's not something where they could just be like, well, I guess we're sticking with the old one. So it meant that the entire process actually went to a court case. And, I got to kind of witness part of that court case. And it was a group of 3 judges. And essentially it was now a bunch of attorneys who were each representing, some of the maps. I think it was 20 some of the maps that had all been proposed and could not be agreed upon during the normal process. And these 3 judges just kind of got so sick of it. It was bad. They did not like what they heard. They did not like these arguments. It got real zany. Definitely quite the court drama. And what they did is they were like, screw this, screw you guys. We are drawing them ourselves. And they also, in drawing the new districts, they did not include incumbent location on the maps. So they ended up drawing out a ton of the incumbents out of their own districts because they did not look at that data, because they said, you guys screwed this up so bad. No, we will not add deference to you. So like a third of all the representatives got drawn out of their own districts. And it was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. But they really made a statement with that. and said that this is a huge responsibility, and that you people did not take it seriously, and you did not honor the people of Kansas, and we are not going to honor you. Mm-hmm.
So this is I still have to say the Constitution is something which is impressive in the United States. So basically, you are making the recommendation of the changes, right? And based on your recommendation, someone has to make the decision. Okay, we do this change and this change. And if they don't agree, because I guess they are both colors inside there, like they are red and blue, or depends on the state,
It
or
depends.
It's always okay.
In Kansas, is actually almost entirely red, and it was just like red against red. So, yeah. I mean, which honestly makes more sense. It's not like everybody fits into two buckets. So there's a pretty big spectrum within each of the two buckets. But yeah.
True. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
And then when they agree, okay, they just do the changes. But when they don't agree, they go in front of a judge or 3 judges in this case.
Yeah, which is rare. Well, it was rare.
It got nuts. Okay. Knowing the technology of today, because you talk about technology progress, Emily, you talk about technology from the 90s to the 2000s and so on. So I think we are making every 10-year increments, we're making huge steps. Huge steps. So if I think about 2012, how my phone looked like in 2012 and how it looks like 10 years later, it's impressive. And you hear the talks about AI agents doing that and that and that. Do you think they could be the impartial solution that we need?
Like that we can use our continued increase in technology for better outcomes? For sure.
Exactly.
For sure we could do that. Wouldn't that be nice?
But we don't want to, right?
Yeah, wouldn't that? Absolutely we could. And like there is real optimism there. I like to think, you know. And that is kind of it's within that realm of optimism that I work with people and that I teach people, saying it can be different, it can be better. We can build these patterns that result in better and better outcomes for everyone. So yeah, absolutely, we can do that. We just got to do it.
What's of course I can answer myself. I can answer my question by myself. Yes, I know. But do you think there is a solution that they somehow commit to an independent, like completely independent thing, or they just don't want to lose the control in or the influence there?
Sure. So actually, after the 2010 census and the redistricting process that happened after that, when I was a part of it, there was at that point in time considered to be a lot of problematic gerrymandering to a bunch of state maps. And the electorate, the voters, the citizens didn't like what they saw, and they started quite a lot of states actually changed their process. They took it out of the legislature and they put it into the hands of, like an independent board. It depends on the state. Every state's in charge of their own process. Here in Colorado, I think it was 2018, they decided to put it into an independent board. So quite a lot of the states did that, including the state of California. And kind of that's where it adds another level of interest to this conversation about what's happening right now, because even the states that chose to try to depoliticize it feel like that isn't an appropriate option anymore, and they're doubling down. So we were close. We were close, but definitely a big change of course.
It's it has to be done for sure, and I think the biggest question is always that deciding person, that crazy person, if you want to call him like this, that says, okay, we do it. Doesn't matter what's the result and what the who's the beneficiary. We just do it, and I think that's critical. I'm constantly thinking about. I don't know if you know the book, the Why Do Nations Fail, by Acimoglu, and he was writing the story of United States writing the Constitution because they, based on the history that they knew about the Spanish going into South America and finding all the gold, the English Empire sent the troops to North America in the hope that they will find the same things. And after 1 year of hunger and searching for gold, and they couldn't find anything, they sent a message back to home and they said, okay, you need to send us real carpenters, real people that can work with metal and so on, to start to build a society here, because otherwise we will eat each other. And the discussion is that the base of the Constitution was written back then when they were desperate, and they tried to make it as safe as possible so that they don't destroy each other. And somehow everything is going back. It makes sense now. Everything makes sense. If you ask me, it's it's crazy.
Yeah. I think a lot about, I think very similar to what you're talking about, the concept of high reliability design, that we need to build systems, especially institutions and social systems, that are designed to work even under a tremendously flawed environment. Because that should be the assumption that we're going to be working under, because that is almost certainly exactly the situation that we're going to be working under. And yeah, how to with sort of like care and compassion and optimism build systems knowing that things will go wrong.
It's interesting how we always take decisions thinking either the current leaders or the previous leaders or whomever was, but we never think about who is going to be in control. And we never think the power that you can give to someone in the future. And this is exactly like you said. I think we have to be more and more aware of the fact that things will go wrong. And yes, people will try to take advantage of the system. Always. And if you leave a small door, they will make a huge gate so to get in. So was your experience working with this was a small trigger in you creating Remake the Rules?
Yeah, I kind of looking back now, absolutely. Because it was that first incident of being like, here we have, 10 years later, incredible tools. We can do this so much better and fairer, but also not, Yeah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
What do you think is the rule of our society that at this moment is fatally flawed?
So something I've been searching for a while now, and hopefully you'll have some recommendations for me, because you definitely seem like quite the reader. I think that one of the significant issues that we have is not enough creative works, be it movies, TV, novels, any sort of creative work, artwork, that is showing us what a optimistic, aspirational future looks like from here. There's so much dystopian, so much, but like, what help me see the path forward, and that is, I'm on this mission to find more and to find some. Unfortunately, it's been pretty hard, but maybe you have some.
Oh my God, I haven't thought about this, but now I realized it. You are right.
Yeah.
So there is literally no hope in fiction.
And it's so cognitively draining for every person to try to see that path. And I think it's real. It's absolutely possible and feasible and can be wonderful and available to us in the not distant future. But for every person to be expected to figure out how to get there and what it looks like on their own, we need artists. We need creative people to show us the way.
I can only think about the Jetsons. Most probably know the
We're almost
cartoon,
there,
right?
yeah.
um, I I think you always need founding for something like this, and happiness doesn't really sell. I mean, that's the biggest problem that we have. Shock is selling, scaring people is selling.
I don't know.
All the things which are bad are selling, because you create somehow the fear in people, and you think, wow. I think about the Walking Dead series, and it's also something that it's not about the zombies or whatever. It's about the human nature that is presented in there. That makes you somehow think, oh my god. I mean, if we really get there, it's gonna be really bad. And we have and I think we talk about, and maybe to put this in in the time frame, we talk after the IPO of SpaceX, and we managed to make a guy who was already rich even richer, and I don't see the benefit of all of this, and I think we don't. I'm sorry for being so dystopian myself as well, or so sad, but I don't think there is a genuine interest of motivating people. I think the genuine interest is to scare people, to keep them under control. And of course, it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but this is. We had such a fun discussion, and you destroyed somehow.
Distraction is easy these days.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
There, but I think
it wasn't meant to be offensive. Please.
I'll take it. Yeah. But I guess to try, it's really tough sometimes to try to search for silver linings. I don't know if I would call this one, but even reaching for positivity can sometimes feel inappropriate, and I guess I acknowledge that as well. But this kind of fear-mongering situation, this way of distorting information and distorting the way that we think and feel and ingest information, is definitely not new, but it is supercharged because of these computers that we all carry around in our pockets. And that is one of these huge changes to how our informational environment has been rocked, like absolutely rocked. And how we have not developed the navigation tools and the context around managing it yet. But I really do believe we can. But it takes time. We humans are building problems that are like way too big for one person to solve, and certainly for them to solve it in an afternoon. But that doesn't mean
Absolutely.
It isn't progress. It's just with a asterisk, I guess. A big asterisk.
You mentioned an interesting fact, and I want to ask you something, because there's something which is I have a son, and it's always the big discussion of like you give him access to the devices, you don't give him access to devices, how much you give them access to devices, and then I always think we don't know how to manage them from our age, because we never had them. We got them when we were already developed, and we didn't actually learn how to manage them in a way that they can be useful for us. And I have the feeling that we somehow do the same mistakes with our kids, like not giving them the access to devices because we are afraid that they will behave exactly like us. of course, now we have countries forbidding social media. I think Australia was the one forbidding social media for under 16. Lately was UK. I think it was last week or this week when they forbid the social media under 16. Is this the right way?
I don't know. Well, one of the things I'm trying to do is not add additional opinions and information to the information ecosystem when there are way more educated and experienced scientists and researchers who are talking about it. So I don't know. There are other incredibly wonderful, smart people who are looking into it and working on it. So we got that. But maybe, and I think we might have even talked about this a little bit last time, part of what makes it, I think, so difficult and mysterious for me is, I believe, and humans have shown over and over and over again that we are extraordinarily adaptable, freaky adaptable. And so these young people who are, again, their brains are operating in just like a completely different informational environment than mine developed in. I don't know what they're going to look like or be or how they're going to function. And just because they're different from the way mine works doesn't mean it's wrong or bad. We're going to find out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What a nice way to close it. I love the sentence that you said, Emil. There are so many people sharing their opinion, even though they have not the experience in this domain. I saw the other day a football player giving his opinion on of UK forbidding social media, and I thought, why? Just why? Thank you for your time. For me, it was an extremely fun discussion. Again, I'll link the previous episode, the previous discussion that we had about remake the rules, and also your links and social media in the show notes caption below. And maybe we get to do it again sometimes on a different, strange, nerdy topic that we both like.
Not gonna run out of those. Yeah, it's just for us. Sorry, audience.
Absolutely. Okay. I keep saying this. If I have fun, there has to be someone in the world that likes it as well.
There you go. And maybe your listeners will come out of the woodwork with some book recommendations, movie and TV recommendations of a hopeful future.
That's a good one. So whomever knows a positive future and a positive book about that, I said it 3 times, a positive future presented in a creation, artistic creation, feel free, put it in the comments below. We are more than happy to see them.
Yeah.
And to read them and to listen to them.
Cherish them. Yeah.
Cherish them. Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Consume them. Let me put it in one sentence. Emily, thank you so much. It was a pleasure again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.